15 million. That is how many Buck 110 folding hunters have rolled off the production line since 1964. Ranchers carried them. Soldiers carried them. Electricians, fishermen, high school kids in rural America who kept one in the back pocket of their jeans until it wore a hole through the denim. For decades, if you saw a black leather sheath on a man's belt anywhere from Montana to Mississippi, you already knew what was inside it. Brass bolsters, dark wood handle, and a clip point blade that locked open with a sound you could hear across the room. And here is the thing that really tells you how dominant this knife became. People stopped calling it by its name. They just called it a buck knife. Even when it was made by someone else entirely. Even when it was a $5 knockoff stamped Pakistan at a flea market table. If it was a lockback folder, it was a buck knife. That is the kind of cultural gravity that does not happen by accident. So how did one family, starting with a 13-year-old blacksmith's apprentice in Kansas, end up building the single most recognized folding knife in American history? To understand that, we need to go back more than 120 years. Back to 1902 in Leavenworth, Kansas, where a kid named Hoyt Buck was working as an apprentice in a local blacksmith shop. He was 10 when he started. By 13, he had already figured out something that most blacksmiths twice his age had not. He developed his own method for heat-treating steel, specifically for hoes and farming tools, that made the edges last longer than anything else on the market. He was not trying to build a knife empire. He was trying to make garden tools that actually worked. Hoyt used whatever metal he could find. Worn-out files, broken rasps, discarded buggy springs. He heated and hammered and ground this scrap steel into blades, and those blades held an edge like nothing his neighbors had ever seen. But knife making was a sideline. Hoyt left Kansas in 1907 for the Pacific Northwest, bounced around, enlisted in the Navy, and eventually ended up in Mountain Home, Idaho, where he worked as a millwright on a dam project. He also pastored a small Assembly of God church in town. And it was in the basement of that church where the buck knife story really begins. When the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor in December 1941, the United States military put out a call to the public for fixed-blade knives. There simply were not enough to arm the troops shipping overseas. Hoyt Buck heard that call, and his response was immediate. He bought an anvil, a forge, and a grinder, set them up in his church basement, and started making knives for the local servicemen stationed at a nearby Air Force base. They brought him the raw materials. He made the knives for free. His wife Daisy did the books and stitched sheaths at the kitchen table. Those wartime blades earned a reputation fast. The soldiers told other soldiers. Word spread through the barracks and across bases. Hoyt Buck's knives were not fancy, but they cut better and stayed sharper than anything the military was issuing. He was forging fixed-blade combat knives from worn-out file blades, each one shaped by hand using the same heat-treating techniques he had developed as a teenager in Kansas. Collectors today call those early wartime knives 4 strikes, because each of the 4 letters in BUCK was stamped onto the blade with an individual letter punch. Finding one of those originals now is like finding a piece of American history buried in a drawer. After the war ended, Hoyt's health was already declining, but he moved to San Diego in 1945 to live closer to his son Al and his growing family. Al had been driving buses for the San Diego Transit Company, pulling a steady paycheck with a dependable schedule. When his father showed up with a forge and a dream, Al did not hesitate. They set up a tiny workshop in a lean-to built onto the side of Al's garage, using scrap lumber collected along the railroad tracks. Daisy, Hoyt's wife, joined them once more, doing bookkeeping and stitching leather sheaths at the kitchen table, just like she had done in the church basement back in Idaho. Father and son, making knives by hand, selling them mostly through mail order. They called the business H. Buck and Son. Hoyt was making about 25 knives a week, each one by hand, each one ground and finished with the same obsessive attention to edge quality that he had been perfecting since he was a kid in Kansas. But his health was failing. In 1948, Hoyt was diagnosed with cancer. He knew his time was short, and he worried about what would happen to the craft he had spent his life developing. Al, who had been making handles and doing assembly work, went to the grinder and tried to finish some blades on his own. He brought them to his father in the hospital. Hoyt looked them over and told him the angles were wrong on this one. The hollow grind was too high on that one, and the handle did not fit right on the other. Al took them home, reground them, and brought them back. Hoyt told him the same things were still off. Al kept grinding. He kept bringing blades to his father. And finally Hoyt looked at one and said, "Now you got it, Al. That is just the way to do it." Hoyt Buck died in 1949. He was never really in the knife business, not in any formal sense. He was a blacksmith, a pastor, and a father who knew how to make steel sing. But he left behind something more valuable than any patent. He left behind the knowledge, passed hand to hand, blade to blade, from a dying man to his son in a hospital room in San Diego. Al Buck kept the business alive through the 1950s. It was a grind, in every sense of the word. He had family members helping out, his own kids pitching in after school, and they eventually expanded into magazine advertising and dealer distribution. But it was still a small operation running out of San Diego, and Al was wearing every hat: manufacturing, sales, shipping, customer service. He was the whole company. His wife helped where she could. His son Chuck grew up learning the trade, watching his father and grandfather work steel, absorbing everything about the craft without any formal training beyond what happened inside that shop. Then, in 1961, something shifted. Al was at choir practice one evening when his pastor walked over and said something along the lines of, "Al, you literally have your nose to the grindstone. You need to incorporate, put in some real money, get the equipment and tooling to start producing at volume." A fellow choir member sitting nearby told Al he believed in the knives so much that he would mortgage his own house to invest. That was the push Al needed. In 1961, Buck Knives officially incorporated. Al and his eldest son Chuck formed the management team alongside several investors, most of them friends from church. They moved manufacturing into a proper facility, started using forged steel blanks to speed up production, and rolled out something that was unheard of for a knife company at the time: an unconditional lifetime warranty. If your Buck knife ever failed, for any reason, they would fix it or replace it. That warranty still stands today. In 1962, Al and his wife Ida did something that sounds almost quaint now. They loaded up a Volkswagen bus and drove across the entire country, stopping at small-town retailers along the way, personally pitching Buck knives to store owners face to face. By the end of that trip, more than 400 stores were carrying Buck products. The company was growing, but it was still known primarily for fixed-blade hunting knives. Good ones, sure. Well respected in the outdoor community, but not yet the kind of product that would reshape an entire industry. That changed on April 18, 1963, when the Buck Board of Directors authorized the development of something new: a folding utility and hunting knife that could match the strength of a fixed blade. At the time, folding knives were mostly slip-joint designs. They did not lock open. If you leaned on the blade while skinning a deer or cutting rope under pressure, it could fold back on your fingers. Hunters who needed a serious knife carried a fixed blade on their belt. There was no getting around it. The engineering challenge was real. You had to build a folding mechanism that was smooth enough to open easily, but strong enough to lock the blade in position under heavy use. A hunter skinning an elk is leaning into that blade with serious force. If the lock fails, fingers get cut. Previous folding knives used slip-joint designs where a spring held the blade open through tension alone. Push hard enough and the blade would fold right back on you. The whole point of a folding hunting knife was that it needed to work like a fixed blade once it was open. Anything less was a compromise people were not willing to make. The result was the Model 110 Folding Hunter. It debuted in 1964 with a 3 3/4 inch clip-point blade, ebony wood handle scales, polished brass bolsters, and a high-tension lockback mechanism with a low-pressure release. The way the lock worked was beautifully simple. A spring-loaded rocker bar on the spine of the handle engaged a notch in the blade's tang when it reached full extension. The blade clicked into place and stayed there, solid as a fixed blade. To close it, you pressed the release at the back of the handle with minimal force, and the blade swung free. You opened it with a nail nick cut into the blade, and when it reached full extension, it locked with a satisfying click that told you the knife was ready to work. 2 hands to open, 2 hands to close. Simple, safe, and built like a tool that expected to be used hard. The price tag was $16. That was expensive for 1964. A typical field knife ran about $5. Buck was charging 3 times the going rate for a folding knife that looked beautiful and promised to do the job of a fixed blade. Most companies would have been nervous about that pricing. Buck backed it with the lifetime warranty and let the product speak for itself. It spoke loudly. Within 6 months, the 110 was the most popular knife Buck had ever produced. Within 2 years, it was the best-selling sports knife in the world. Hunters, who had always strapped a sheath knife to their hip, suddenly had an alternative that folded up, fit in a belt pouch, and locked open solid enough to field dress an elk. Ranchers carried it. Police officers carried it. Tradespeople carried it. There was not a profession in America that could not find a use for that knife. In the 1970s and 80s, you could walk into just about any hardware store, bait shop, or gas station in rural America and find a Buck 110 behind the counter or in the display case. It was hard not to spot the distinctive black leather sheath on the belts of men from all walks of life. High school students in small towns carried them to class, and teachers would occasionally borrow a student's knife to open a box or cut packing tape. That was just the culture. Nobody thought twice about it. The 110 was not a weapon. It was a tool. An everyday companion that sat on your hip the same way your wallet sat in your pocket. Some guys in the 70s and 80s figured out that if you closed the blade on a matchstick or a toothpick, leaving just enough gap to get a fingernail in, you could flick the knife open one-handed as you drew it from your pocket. It was a little trick that got passed around hunting camps and shop floors. The kind of practical hack that happens when millions of people carry the same knife every day and start finding their own shortcuts. There were also persistent legends about someone's older cousin or uncle who had supposedly converted their 110 into a switchblade. Those stories were mostly tall tales traded at deer camp, but they spoke to how deeply embedded this knife was in everyday American life. And then came the copies. Because Buck never patented the lockback mechanism, every knife manufacturer on the planet saw what was happening and wanted their own version. Schrade made one, Camillus made one. Gerber, Browning, Puma, Western, Bear, Carbar, and dozens of others all produced their own lockback folders with wood handles and brass bolsters. Even Sears had Craftsman-branded versions made by contract manufacturers. Overseas factories in Pakistan, India, and Taiwan pumped out cheap imitations by the millions. You could find them at flea markets for a couple of dollars, stamped with no-name brands but unmistakably patterned after the 110. The brass was thinner, the wood was cheaper, the lock was looser, but the silhouette was the same. Of the knife designs attributable to a single maker, the Buck 110 is widely considered the most copied knife in the world. That is not an exaggeration. Every flea market table, every pawn shop glass case, every army surplus bin in America had at least a few knockoffs sitting in it. And the funny thing is, people still called all of them Buck knives. The name had become generic, the way people say Band-Aid when they mean adhesive bandage or Kleenex when they mean tissue. If it was a lockback folder with wood and brass, it was a Buck knife. The company had become so dominant that their brand name became the category itself. Now, the steel snobs in the knife world have always had opinions about Buck's choice of blade material. For most of its production life, the 110 has used 420HC stainless steel, which is not exactly exotic by modern standards. People who spend $500 on boutique folders with CPM steel and titanium frames will sometimes wave their hand at 420HC like it is beneath discussion. But that attitude misses something important. Steel is only as good as its heat treatment, and Buck has a secret weapon that has been hiding in plain sight for decades. His name was Paul Boz. Starting in the late 1950s, Boss developed a proprietary process for heat-treating knife blades that fundamentally changed what budget steel could do. He was not a knife maker himself. He was a metallurgist, a heat-treat specialist who started in a high school metal shop class and built a career around understanding exactly how steel behaves when you heat it, freeze it, and reheat it at precise temperatures. His company, Certified Metal Craft, became one of the largest heat-treating services in Southern California, handling aerospace-grade components for Boeing, Lockheed, and General Dynamics. But he never stopped treating knife blades on the side. Custom knife makers from across the country sent their blades to Paul Boss because his name on a knife meant something. If a blade had been heat-treated by Boss, that was all anyone needed to hear. In the late 1970s, Buck Knives brought him in to set up their internal heat treat department. Eventually, they worked out an arrangement where Boss would operate his own business right inside the Buck factory. When Buck relocated to Post Falls, Idaho in 2005, Boss sold his business to the company and moved with them. He served 70% of America's custom knife makers while simultaneously overseeing every blade that left the Buck plant. The Boss heat treat process is what makes a $40 Buck 110 outperform knives that cost 3 times as much in edge retention. The 420HC blade comes out of that process at a Rockwell hardness of around 60, which gives you a blade that holds an edge, resists corrosion, and is easy to resharpen with a basic whetstone in the field. No diamond hones required, no afternoon of frustration, just a few passes on a stone and you are back to a shaving edge. Boss received the Blade Magazine Industry Achievement Award in 2007. In 2010, he was inducted into the Blade Magazine Cutlery Hall of Fame in recognition of nearly 50 years as the foremost authority on knife blade heat treatment. He personally trained his successor, Paul Farner, who continues the tradition at the Buck factory to this day. Meanwhile, the Buck family kept passing the torch. Chuck Buck, Al's son, took over leadership in 1979 and ran the company for 20 years. Under Chuck, Buck expanded into survival knives, tactical models, and even won a contract to manufacture the M9 bayonet for the United States Army with an initial order of 315,600 units. Chuck and his wife Lori navigated the company through a period of massive growth and increasing international competition. In 1999, Chuck's son, CJ, became the 4th-generation leader. CJ faced a challenge his father and grandfathers never had to deal with. California was becoming increasingly expensive and difficult for manufacturers. Taxes were rising. Regulations were piling up. The cost of doing business in San Diego was eating into the margins that kept American-made knives competitive against overseas imports. In 2000, Buck opened a plant in China to produce lower-cost models for big-box retailers. Imports from that facility eventually reached 30% of Buck's total output. It was a concession that CJ hated but understood was necessary to survive. Then, in 2005, CJ made the call that he later said could have saved the company millions if it had been made a decade earlier. He moved the entire operation to Post Falls, Idaho, in the northern panhandle near the Spokane River. The move was a blow to San Diego's business community, but for Buck, it meant lower costs, a supportive local community, and proximity to the hunting, fishing, and outdoor culture that defined the brand. The factory in Post Falls is a 130,000 square foot facility with over 300 employees. Some of them have been with the company for over 40 years. It takes about 3 years to fully train a new employee because the work requires that kind of precision. Today, the Buck 110 is still in production, still handcrafted in Idaho, still built around that same lockback mechanism that changed the industry in 1964. The classic version with ebony wood and brass bolsters weighs 7.2 ounces and retails for under $50. That ebony wood has its own story, by the way. When the knife was originally introduced, Buck used genuine ebony for the handle scales. In the 1990s, federal regulations aimed at protecting endangered tropical hardwoods forced them to switch to a resin-treated alternative. Customers noticed the difference. Years later, Buck partnered with Taylor Guitars, the acoustic guitar manufacturer, who had built a conservation program around sustainable ebony harvesting in Cameroon. That partnership allowed Buck to return to using real ebony on their flagship models, and the knife community appreciated the effort. For people who want something lighter for daily pocket carry, the 110 LT swaps the brass and wood for fiberglass reinforced nylon, dropping the weight to just 3.2 ounces, while keeping the same Boss-treated blade. That is a 55% reduction in weight for a knife that still locks up solid and cuts the same way. For the collectors and steel enthusiasts, the Slim Pro TRX series offers S30V and MagnaCut steel options with G10 handles and a deep carry pocket clip that lets you carry the knife discreetly in your pocket instead of on your belt. Buck even produces limited runs with elk antler handles, using roughly 5,000 pounds of naturally shed antlers every year. No two of those knives are exactly alike. They are a piece of the American wilderness fitted into a knife frame, and they sell out fast. The 110 also came full circle in 2017 when Buck introduced an automatic version at SHOT Show. For years, there had been legends in rural America about older cousins and uncles who had converted their 110s into switchblades. Most of those stories were tall tales passed around deer camps, but Buck made it real with the 110 Auto, a fully automatic version of the classic design that proved wildly popular. If you find yourself in the Idaho Panhandle, the Buck factory in Post Falls offers free 45-minute tours to the public, Monday through Thursday. You can walk the production floor and watch rolls of American steel get stamped, ground, and polished into finished blades. You can see the heat treat tunnels where the pull boss process happens. You can watch master sharpeners put the final edge on blades by hand. And you can visit the expanded retail store where they will sharpen your old beat-up 110 back to factory specs for a small fee. 5 generations of one family. More than 120 years of making knives. From a church basement in Mountain Home, Idaho, to a 130,000 square foot factory in Post Falls, 60 years later. 15 million units of a single model that became so popular, it turned the family name into a synonym for every lockback folder in America. The Buck 110 did not just sell well, it created a category. It proved that a folding knife could work as hard as a fixed blade. It gave every competitor in the industry something to chase and something to copy. And it did all of that without ever losing the look and feel of the original. The brass bolsters still catch the light the same way they did in 1964. The blade still locks into place with that same unmistakable click. The lifetime warranty still means what it meant when Al Buck first offered it, that the company stands behind every knife with their name on it. And somewhere right now, in a deer camp or a ranch truck, or sitting in the top drawer of a grandfather's nightstand, there is a worn black leather sheath with a 110 inside. The brass is scratched. The ebony is darkened from years of palm sweat and use. The blade has been sharpened so many times that the clip point has thinned out just a little. But it still opens smooth, still locks tight, and still cuts like the day it was made. That is the kind of knife the Buck family set out to build. That is the kind of knife 15 million people decided was worth carrying. If this story got you, hit subscribe and drop a comment about the knife you grew up with, or the one still riding on your belt. And if you know someone who carries a 110, send them this video. They will thank you for it.